Humans made excellent spies, with their unremarkable appearance and chameleon-like adaptability. Many Consortium species viewed humans as physically weak or uninspired, often failing to notice their ability to blend seamlessly into nearly any role. It was this quality that Earth's Council exploited to its fullest. Back on Earth, intelligence centers poured over data returned from their operatives, breaking down advanced technologies into fundamental components. Scientists and engineers worked night and day, pushing humanity's understanding of physics and weaponry to the edge, using Consortium secrets to leap centuries ahead of where they'd otherwise be. They weren't content with mere imitation. Every stolen blueprint became the foundation for something new, something better. Earth was building its own arsenal, an arsenal so advanced that even the most powerful Consortium members would be taken aback. The time came when Earth's leaders knew they could no longer remain passive, biding their time on their home planet. Humanity needed more than plans and prototypes, they needed the means to bring them to life, and they needed it far away from Consortium prying eyes. And so, in the shadows of Earth's governing halls, the plan for the Silent Armada was born. The orders were simple, though the logistics behind them were daunting. Massive resources would be dispatched to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, concealed by their very remoteness. Asteroids in a dark, isolated sector would be transformed into construction yards, protected by cloaking devices and surveillance grids that Earth's spies had smuggled away from Consortium laboratories. The workforce would consist of Earth's most skilled engineers and tacticians, people whose brilliance was tempered by a fierce loyalty to their home. The announcement spread in whispers through the highest ranks. For the chosen few who would go, there would be no return, only a life spent in deep space, building humanity's best chance at freedom. They knew the stakes, understood that the Consortium saw Earth as prey, a future acquisition to be divided and sold. But in their eyes burned the same fire that had carried humanity from the caves to the stars, defiance. Transport ships, cloaked and silent, began their journeys across light years, ferrying the raw materials, machinery, and personnel necessary to bring the Armada to life. As Earth's leaders watched the first wave of transports disappear into the black, they felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in generations. It was the hope that, one day, they would return to these Consortium overlords, not as subjects, but as equals. Or perhaps, should it come to it, as conquerors. The galaxy was vast, its corridors threaded with lightspeed routes and hyperlanes, each connecting worlds both familiar and strange. Among these worlds, Earth was barely a mote, a modest blue planet orbiting a relatively young star. To the galactic Consortium, Earth was a minor note in a grand symphony, a planet of limited value, inhabited by a species known mostly for its irrepressible curiosity and stubborn survival instincts. No one in the high councils of the Consortium saw humans as more than a persistent nuisance, another species among thousands, hardly worth the trouble of formal recognition. Earth, however, had learned to read between the lines. For centuries, Earth's leaders had watched, waited, and listened, understanding that humanity's place in the galaxy was as precarious as it was invisible. Though they applied again and again for membership in the Consortium, each appeal was met with cold silence or, worse, polite dismissal. The humans had not proven their value, or so the official word went. They had no remarkable technologies, no vast natural resources that the Consortium didn't already possess. And despite the humans' eagerness to join the galactic community, they were repeatedly left on the fringes. Yet humanity had always been at its best when underestimated. Over generations, Earth's best and brightest saw the writing on the wall. Consortium records, accessible only through the most devious and dangerous of means, hinted at a future auction, an eventual sale of Earth's resources, its people, and all that lay on its surface. The Consortium, it seemed, already assumed humanity would eventually be conquered or sold to the highest bidder. Earth was a commodity waiting for appraisal, nothing more. So, the humans devised a plan, a risky, audacious strategy that drew on the skills of every engineer, scientist, strategist, and industrialist Earth had to offer. If the galaxy refused to acknowledge Earth's sovereignty, Earth would make itself too powerful to ignore. To the untrained eye, Earth's society appeared as always, productive, inventive, bustling. But behind the facade, an intricate network of agents had been built, a network capable of slipping into places they were never meant to reach. These operatives, often unsuspected for their quiet adaptability, embedded themselves within the Consortium's various layers, gathering intelligence and observing the galaxy's highest technological achievements. They studied propulsion systems, energy grids, weapons engineering, and biological adaptations. They operated in silence, bringing back blueprints, formulae, and crucial secrets to Earth's leaders. The Silent Armada would remain hidden, a rumor, a whisper on the edge of the galaxy. But it would be there, waiting. And the Consortium, unaware, continued its plans. The mining colony, nestled deep within the asteroid field of a remote star system, was as isolated as it was unassuming. The sheer vastness of space was humbling here, with asteroids stretching for millions of miles in every direction, lifeless rock drifting in cold silence. But to Steve Hawthorne, this desolation was brimming with potential. Each asteroid was a trove of metals, minerals, and unknown elements waiting to be harnessed for a purpose that Earth itself would likely never witness. Steve had only just turned 26 when he accepted the mission, leaving behind family, friends, and a life on Earth that he knew he'd likely never return to. He was a mechanical engineer, considered a prodigy for his age. His professors had often joked that he'd been born with a wrench in one hand and a blueprint in the other. He had excelled through the ranks of Earth's scientific communities with ease, his sharp mind matched only by his relentless determination. When the call came to join the effort to build the Silent Armada, Steve volunteered without a second thought. He couldn't imagine a greater purpose than ensuring Earth's survival. The colony was a marvel in itself. Excavated into the asteroid's depths, it consisted of corridors and chambers that pulsed with activity and the hum of machines. Massive air recyclers kept the atmosphere fresh, and the colony's artificial gravity fields lent an eerie sense of normalcy to an otherwise alien environment. Each day, Steve was surrounded by engineers, metallurgists, scientists, and inventors, all working tirelessly to construct the foundation of Earth's first fleet of warships. For Steve, daily life on the colony was a mixture of intense labor and strange camaraderie. He would wake up early, join the other engineers in the lab, and spend hours testing the strength of new alloys, calibrating the mechanics of propulsion systems, or developing heat shields to withstand re-entry speeds. His hands were often stained with machine oil, his face smudged with dust from asteroid ore, and he was exactly where he wanted to be. In the evenings, the colony's inhabitants would gather in the common room, where they shared stories, jokes, and sometimes the rare bottle of synthetic liquor smuggled in on supply runs. There was a deep pride in being here, a knowledge that they were chosen for something monumental. Most of them understood that they would never see the Armada completed in their lifetimes. The initial estimates for completion were staggering, spanning 50 to 100 years. But it didn't matter. They all shared a common goal, a common hope, that future generations on Earth would be free to live without fear of the Consortium. One night, as most of the colony's residents settled down to rest, Steve found himself back in the lab. He was engrossed in a new mineral they'd recently unearthed in one of the larger asteroids, a substance unlike anything he'd seen before. It was dense yet remarkably lightweight, with a molecular structure that hinted at untapped potential. His initial tests had shown that the mineral was highly reactive to certain energy frequencies, so he decided to take things further. Setting up his equipment, he calibrated a series of low-frequency modulators and adjusted several lasers to converge on the mineral's surface. He activated the machinery, watching intently as the beams hit the mineral. The usual soft glow of lasers intensified. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light, and Steve felt his skin prickling with heat. He stumbled back, shielding his face, but the burn felt like the sting of a sunburn on his exposed hands and neck. Heart pounding, he peered cautiously at the experimental setup, and there, hovering above the mineral's remains, was a small, brilliant sphere of light, no larger than a marble. Its glow was so intense that it cast dark shadows across the lab. Steve's eyes widened as he took in the readings. The energy output was off the charts, unlike anything Earth's current technology could generate. He'd somehow created a miniature sun, a self-contained fusion reaction, pulsing with more power than he thought possible. Tentatively, Steve adjusted his instruments to analyze the sphere's energy signatures. The implications struck him like a physical blow. If harnessed correctly, this tiny sun could revolutionize their plans for the Armada. The energy it generated was enough to power engines, weapons, and shields at levels beyond what any Consortium warship could withstand. This could be the key to creating a fleet that not only rivaled the Consortium but surpassed it in every conceivable way. The next morning, barely able to contain his excitement, Steve gathered his notes and rushed to the colony's central administration chamber. His project manager, a grizzled ex-miner named Callum Greaves, listened with rapt attention as Steve explained what he'd created, showing data readings and diagrams. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Greaves clapped Steve on the shoulder, his normally stern expression softening into a rare smile. "Steve, if this works the way you're saying, we'll be building more than ships, we'll be building legends." News of the breakthrough spread quickly, and by evening, the entire colony gathered in the common room to celebrate Steve's achievement. The air buzzed with newfound hope. They toasted to him, shaking his hand, patting his back, and joking that they'd name a ship after him one day. For the first time, the distant dream of the Armada felt like a tangible reality, one they might actually see realized within their lifetimes. Steve smiled and accepted the congratulations, but as the evening wore on, he felt a quiet melancholy settle over him. He was grateful, proud even, but he knew that he and most of the others would never see the day when the Armada would soar through the stars. This was a mission that would outlast them all, a legacy for the generations who would follow. Yet as he looked around at the faces of his fellow pioneers, he felt a warmth that surpassed his own achievement. They might never see Earth free from the Consortium's shadow, but they were building a future in which it could be. And that, Steve thought, was enough. Steve Hawthorne had never been one to settle. From the moment he stepped into the engineering world, he pushed boundaries, questioned the possible, and defied expectations. But now, with the creation of the Hawthorne Sun under his belt, he was driven by a new fire. He wanted to see the Silent Armada built, not just as blueprints or holograms, not only as empty hulls. He wanted to witness its reality, to walk through the finished warships, to know that his own hands had contributed to the power and might that Earth would bring to the galaxy. The Armada's original timeline was a sobering shadow over his achievements. 50 to 100 years. That was the official estimate, and the sheer scope weighed heavily on him. He couldn't bear the thought of waiting, knowing he might never live to see the moment when Earth's fleet launched into the stars. He began to press himself harder, asking for more hours, pushing his body and mind to exhaustion. His fame within the colony only fueled him. After all, he was no longer just Steve Hawthorne, the engineer. He was the Steve Hawthorne, the inventor of the Hawthorne Sun, the young genius with the potential to give humanity its edge. The colony leadership respected his drive and granted him a private lab, fully stocked with the latest equipment and technology they could spare. They assigned a team to him as well, scientists and engineers who took pride in being associated with Steve's work. They worked side by side, devising ways to hasten the mining, refining, and assembly processes, each hoping for a miracle. But as the months dragged on, Steve grew restless. The progress was painstakingly slow. They had managed to complete only the hull of one ship, a sleek but empty shell floating in the asteroid field. Steve could feel his body breaking under the stress. His eyes were rimmed with shadows, his limbs sore from hours of laborious testing and recalibrating. He spent sleepless nights in his lab, shuffling between experiments, testing new alloys, tinkering with fabrication methods. He became obsessed, his every waking thought occupied by one question: how do I speed this up? One evening, he found himself in the lab yet again, staring at a pile of raw ore in front of him, his mind drifting. Exhausted, he let himself sink into an old memory, those days on Earth when he would watch the late-night television broadcasts, the science fiction shows and movies that sparked his early love for engineering. An image flashed through his mind, a scene where people stepped onto a platform, and with a shimmer of light, they vanished, only to reappear somewhere else. The concept was wild, impossible even, but it lingered in his mind. Transporter. That was what they called it. He whispered the word aloud, almost as if afraid it would disappear with the sound. Transporter. What if? What if I could use that idea? Not for people, but for material? The idea struck him so suddenly it felt like a physical shock. What if he could break down raw material to its atomic level, dematerializing it, and then reassemble it elsewhere in a different form? He could skip the long process of extraction, refining, and shaping. If he had a machine capable of such transformation, he could, in theory, take the ore from the asteroids and instantly create finished components for the ships. Hulls, bulkheads, circuitry, anything they needed could be transported from raw material to refined structure. Steve's mind raced. With the right setup, he could even program the machine to rearrange atomic structures, taking ordinary minerals and combining them into something entirely new. In essence, he could turn the raw asteroid material into any finished product they needed. The implications were staggering. He could accelerate the process by orders of magnitude. With a burst of renewed energy, he scribbled out a series of equations, filling sheet after sheet with theoretical models. He'd need an energy source more powerful than anything Earth currently had. Thankfully, he'd already created one. The Hawthorne Sun was more than capable of powering such a device. But the real challenge would be building a system precise enough to handle atomic manipulation on such a grand scale. The notion felt impossibly ambitious, but Steve's excitement outweighed his doubts. He was used to venturing into the unknown. This wasn't just a device, it was a tool that could change everything for Earth. It could revolutionize resource production, construction, even everyday needs. If he could perfect this, there would be no limit to what humanity could build, even here on the edge of space. Steve threw himself into his work with a fervor he hadn't felt since discovering the mini-sun. His fatigue vanished, replaced by an exhilaration that gripped him day and night. He began mapping out blueprints for what he called the Material Transfiguration Device. His team, watching from the sidelines, could only marvel at his boundless energy and ideas, though they couldn't yet grasp the full scope of his vision. He started with small experiments, disassembling tiny amounts of ore at a molecular level, attempting to reconstruct it into different shapes. The early results were flawed, each one reminding him just how monumental his task was. But he pressed on, convinced that a breakthrough lay just beyond his reach. Steve's obsession with his work didn't go unnoticed. His colleagues admired his tenacity, but they grew concerned as he continued pushing himself beyond his limits. They gently reminded him to rest, to step back occasionally. But Steve couldn't bring himself to stop, not now. He'd glimpsed a future where the Armada could be completed within a fraction of the original timeline, and he couldn't let go of that vision. Late one night, as he pieced together yet another failed attempt, he paused and looked around the empty lab. His skin prickled as he thought of the stakes, the future of Earth, the sacrifices of everyone here. They'd come to this desolate colony with the knowledge that they might never see Earth's victory, and yet they worked tirelessly, each willing to give their lives for that faint glimmer of hope. Steve felt a surge of responsibility, a drive to succeed not just for himself, but for all of them. As he stood alone in the lab, a new determination settled over him. He would make this dream a reality. The Material Transfiguration Device would become more than theory, more than failed prototypes. He would push through every obstacle, test every possibility. And if he succeeded, he knew, they could bring the Silent Armada to life within their lifetimes. For now, he returned to his notes, refining his design, but his heart swelled with the hope that one day soon, the people of this mining colony might see their work transformed from the bleak, metallic walls of their asteroid habitat into the proud steel of Earth's salvation. It took months of sweat, exhaustion, and relentless dedication, but finally, Steve Hawthorne's dream was real. Standing in the lab, he stared in awe at the solid, perfectly formed metallic cube he created using the Material Transfiguration Device, the MTD. It was his most ambitious creation yet, a small yet mighty symbol of human ingenuity and defiance. It had started with the raw ore, reduced to atoms and restructured into this remarkable alloy, a material so dense and durable that it might as well have been forged from pure determination. The colony's scientists gathered around, curious and excited. They knew what was coming next, the tests. They would push the cube to its limits, gauge the strength of the new alloy, and see just how much power it could endure. Steve looked over at Dr. Lindgren, the colony's materials specialist, and nodded. With a slight smile, she set the machines in motion. First, they attempted to crush it, exerting pounds of force that would have flattened any known metal. Nothing. The cube remained solid, its edges as sharp and precise as when it first emerged from the MTD. They increased the pressure until the machine's indicators lit up red, signaling maximum force. Yet the cube remained untouched. After an hour of failure and compression, they escalated to heat testing. Using the power from the Hawthorne Sun, they generated temperatures well beyond what even the most resilient metals could endure. The cube began to glow faintly, but it held firm. Steve felt a swell of satisfaction. His creation was passing every test with flying colors. They subjected it to lasers, extreme cold, high-frequency sound waves, and even acid. The results were the same. The cube was indestructible. When the final test was over, the team broke into spontaneous applause. Steve was flooded with congratulations and handshakes, the pride of his team mirroring his own relief and joy. They had done it. They had created a material that could withstand the unforgiving harshness of space, the intense temperatures of battle, and the weaponry of the Consortium. For the first time, they could envision the Silent Armada not just as a plan, but as a real, unstoppable fleet. With their initial success, Steve and his team set about refining the MTD. They needed it to be more versatile, capable of shaping metals into complex forms. The goal was to have the MTD produce specific components for their fleet, from hulls to structural frameworks, even small parts and circuitry. It took weeks of programming and fine-tuning, but soon, they achieved something extraordinary. The MTD could create any shape they wanted, from curved armor plating to intricate support beams. The only thing that could break down this material once it solidified was the MTD itself, allowing them a unique advantage. If something went wrong or if a ship needed repairs, they could reduce the parts back to raw material and reforge them. The flexibility was unprecedented. And the excitement was infectious. The entire colony buzzed with activity as word spread of their success. Steve could see it in their eyes, the recognition that they were not just building ships, they were building legends. The colony leaders held a meeting to assess the next steps. With the MTD's capabilities, they could replicate the device and distribute it across the asteroid belt. They planned for at least 100 MTD units, each one equipped with small propulsion rockets to allow them to maneuver in space. The machines would act as a swarm of builders, assembling the ships on the spot, directly from the raw material mined from the asteroids. Other automated machinery, stationed in orbit-like manufacturing plants, would produce consoles, cables, electronics, and all the components needed to complete each ship. It was an operation of unimaginable scale. The new projections came in, and Steve could hardly believe his eyes. With the MTDs and automated production lines, they could complete an armada of 100 carriers, 1,000 fighters, 200 battleships, and countless support vessels in just 10 years. For the first time, they had a timeline they could believe in, one that felt real and achievable. When the news was announced, cheers erupted across the colony. People celebrated in the mess halls, bars, and corridors, sharing stories of triumph, hope, and the promise of a fleet that would one day defend their home. It felt like a victory. It felt like a milestone. In the middle of the festivities, an urgent message came through. It was an encrypted communication from Earth, marked with the highest priority. Steve's project manager, Captain Arlen, called for silence as the message was decoded, and a somber hush fell over the room as they gathered around the display screen. The message detailed a concerning report. Consortium members had recently taken a heightened interest in Earth. Over the past months, several high-ranking officials from powerful Consortium worlds had visited Earth on diplomatic missions. They'd asked far too many questions about Earth's population, age demographics, natural resources, and even military capabilities. The message continued, explaining that Earth's leaders had grown uneasy. These visits felt less like diplomacy and more like an appraisal, the kind one might make before a transaction. The Earth government suspected that the Consortium was considering putting Earth on the market, auctioning off its people and resources to the highest bidder. There was no clear evidence yet, but the writing was on the wall. Earth was running out of time. The mood in the room shifted from joy to dread. All eyes were on Captain Arlen as he addressed the crowd. "This," he said, gesturing to the message, "is why we're here. This is why we're working day and night, why we've left our families behind, and why we can't afford to fail. Earth needs us." A quiet murmur spread through the crowd, the gravity of their mission settling over them like a weight. But Steve saw something else, too, a glimmer of renewed determination. They knew that every hour counted, every day brought them closer to the moment when they could defend their home. If they could complete the Armada before the Consortium acted, they might stand a chance. After the meeting, Steve walked back to his lab, his mind churning. The timeline might be tight, but they had hope. And they had the MTD, a tool that could defy the odds and give them a chance against the Consortium's vast forces. For now, they could only press on, fueled by a purpose stronger than fear. Steve paused, looking out at the stars through a small observation port. Somewhere out there, Earth waited, vulnerable yet unaware of the silent, determined force that labored on its behalf. He knew that they might not finish in time. He knew the risks. But for the first time, he believed in something greater than himself, a fleet that could protect Earth, a symbol of resistance, and the unwavering spirit of humanity. In the vast halls of the asteroid colony, the decision was made. The Armada would no longer follow an assembly line approach to construction. Instead, each ship would be completed fully before moving on to the next. The rationale was simple. When the Consortium inevitably came, a small but complete fleet would be far more useful than dozens of half-finished vessels. The colony leaders agreed on the initial fleet configuration: 3 carriers, 10 battleships, and 100 fighter craft. It was a powerful start, yet it felt modest against the scale of the impending conflict. As construction accelerated, Earth sent wave after wave of military personnel to the asteroid colony. They were soldiers, officers, and specialists, handpicked from every division and ranked to form the elite crews of the Silent Armada. Every arrival was an event. Each shuttle that touched down brought with it new faces, new skills, and a fresh surge of purpose. These were the people who would carry humanity's hopes into battle, who would fight and, if necessary, die to protect Earth. Admiral Mark Reed, a seasoned officer with gray streaks in his hair and a presence that commanded respect, arrived with the first wave of Earth's finest. Known for his tactical genius and unwavering loyalty, Reed had been chosen not only for his expertise but for his deep understanding of what was at stake. The moment he arrived, he toured the colony, inspecting each ship, testing equipment, and meeting his new officers. He radiated calm under pressure, a steady anchor amidst the storm brewing on the horizon. Steve Hawthorne, now something of a legend in his own right, was assigned to brief Admiral Reed on the fleet's technology. When they met, Steve noticed the Admiral's critical eye examining every detail of the facility, the ships, and the people bustling around him. Reed extended a hand with a firm grip, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Dr. Hawthorne," the Admiral greeted him. "I've heard quite a bit about you. This new alloy, the MTD, you've given us the tools we need to protect Earth. On behalf of humanity, I thank you." Steve gave a humble nod, his hands fidgeting as they often did under pressure. "It's a team effort, Admiral. I just hope it'll be enough." Reed's eyes softened a bit. "With ingenuity like yours, Dr. Hawthorne, we might just have a fighting chance." They walked through the shipyard, the steel titans of the fleet looming above them. The faint hum of machinery and voices of technicians echoed through the space, where engineers applied the finishing touches to the first battleships. Reed was impressed with the quality and robustness of the designs, asking detailed questions about the ship's capabilities, maneuverability, and resilience. At Reed's urging, they entered Steve's lab. There, surrounded by blueprints, laser prototypes, and an array of testing equipment, Steve explained his latest breakthrough. "The MTD may have given us strong hulls, but I've shifted my focus. A ship is only as powerful as its weapons." Reed nodded, listening intently. "I've been working on a new energy weapon," Steve continued, his face lighting up with excitement. "Using low-frequency modulation from the Hawthorne Sun, we can channel a pulse through crystalline circuits. In testing, it could theoretically generate enough energy to vaporize a Consortium cruiser with a single shot." Reed's eyebrows rose. "You're telling me you've created a weapon capable of one-shot destruction?" "Yes. I'm still in the testing phase, but initial results are promising," Steve replied with a hint of cautious optimism. "Promising is good enough for now," Reed said with a hint of a smile. "Just having it as a possibility could be the edge we need." Steve appreciated the Admiral's confidence, but he knew they were still in a race against time. With every passing day, the Consortium's shadow loomed larger, the sense of urgency like a storm bearing down on them. Weeks passed, and under Reed's command, the first ships of the Silent Armada reached completion. They shimmered in the docking bay, sleek and deadly, each vessel outfitted with the cutting-edge technology Steve and his team had pioneered. The carriers were massive, able to house hundreds of fighter craft and sustain weeks-long journeys across hostile space. The battleships were imposing, their armor and firepower unmatched by anything in Earth's history. And the fighters, compact and agile, each equipped with twin plasma cannons and capable of accelerating to tremendous speeds, looked ready to take on a fleet by themselves. Reed's training regimens were grueling, as intense as the stakes demanded. From dawn until dusk, the crews drilled in the mock-up bridge, learning the systems and protocols they would need to control the ships. They practiced emergency scenarios, weapons handling, maneuvers in low and zero gravity. Reed demanded their best, and they gave it willingly, knowing that their lives, and the future of their species, depended on it. Morale was high, but there was a lingering tension beneath the surface. Everyone knew they only had as much time as the Consortium allowed them. They trained with a sense of urgency, understanding that at any moment, they might be called upon to put their training into action. As the crew continued their preparation, an encoded message arrived from Earth. Reed gathered his officers in the briefing room, and Steve, now a critical member of the Armada's strategy, was invited to join. The message was short but chilling. Consortium vessels had been spotted in Earth's solar system. It was a small fleet, but its arrival was unmistakable. They were scouts, undoubtedly sent to assess the Earth's defenses and report back. Earth's leaders feared it was the beginning of something much larger, a prelude to an ultimatum or an invasion. Steve and Reed shared a tense look. This was exactly what they had feared. There was no more time. The training, the preparations, the unfinished ships, it would all be tested sooner than they had anticipated. Reed addressed the gathered crew. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we're out of time. The Consortium has reached Earth. We've trained hard, we've prepared as best we can, and now we're going to prove ourselves. Get to your ships. This is not a drill." The klaxons began to wail, and the crews scrambled to their stations. Mechanics and engineers ran through the corridors, making last-minute adjustments and locking down panels. Pilots donned their flight suits, fastening their helmets and preparing for the launch. Reed moved from group to group, checking on his officers, offering words of encouragement and steadying hands. Steve headed to his lab to monitor the systems he'd designed, his heart pounding with both excitement and fear. They had done everything they could. Now, it was time to see if it would be enough. He looked back at Reed, who was issuing orders over the comms, and couldn't help but feel a profound sense of admiration. Here was a leader who had been through it all, who understood the weight of their mission and carried it with an unflinching resolve. Steve took a deep breath, steadied himself, and refocused on his controls. The wail of the sirens grew louder, signaling the imminent launch. Engines hummed to life, the roar of power resonating through the corridors of the colony. The Silent Armada was about to take flight, and the future of humanity would ride on their shoulders.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe and visit the channel for more interesting sci-fi stories and content.